Hey, hi, and hello, everyone. Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. And we're not talking about music today, though. We're talking about cartoons and animation. Being an elder millennial, I have quite a bit of nostalgia for cartoons of the 80s and 90s and a little bit beyond. That was a big part of my media consumption diet. I would say that's still kind of true today to a degree, but especially true of when I was younger. And I have a lot of love for those classic Nickelodeon cartoon shows generally. I remember a lot of them vividly and thought it would be fun to go through much of them here and rank them out in terms of how great I think they were generally and their cultural impact and influence and staying power, how well they've aged too. And let's just go through it. Feel free to get into it in the comments and throw out your own tier lists and opinions in reaction to what I'm saying. And a quick shout out to our sponsor, good people over at The Ridge, still making these awesome nifty metal plated wallets. Hit up that link down below, promo code MELON, 10% off your order, all you gotta know. Hey Arnold, what can be said about Hey Arnold? Back in the day when I was a kid, when Hey Arnold would air, would I watch it? Most times, yes. Would I enjoy it as much as I would maybe other cartoons? No. And that's because I think when I was younger, I enjoyed and looked for a lot more kind of chaos and absurdity out of the cartoons that I watched. I wasn't so much a Doug guy as I was like a Ren and Stimpy guy, even though in retrospect and looking at those cartoons, face to face as an adult, Doug has aged far better than Ren and Stimpy. And there are a lot more, narrative and emotional subtleties to a show like Hey Arnold, as well as Doug, than there are Ren and Stimpy. I mean, as a child looking at Ren and Stimpy, you pretty much get everything the show has to offer, whereas like maybe a show also like Rocko's Modern Life, for example, there's a lot of very like adult satire there that you don't understand fully when you're a kid, but again, like as an adult, Ren and Stimpy is pretty surface level, and there isn't really much there outside of just how gross and in your face it is, just to kind of give you guys an idea of where I was coming from then and where I'm coming from now. Hey Arnold is a show that I think I appreciate a lot more in retrospect in terms of like its emotional subtleties, its kind of slice of life quality, the relatability of Arnold as a kid, and not just the sense of humor of the show, but also Arnold's ability to work through situations and difficult social, I guess, obstacles in his life, and emotionally be compassionate toward those who may be going through a hard time, and generally be like helpful and thoughtful, and also navigate difficult characters. It sort of seems like a lot of the time Arnold wasn't so much the chaos agent, but everything else around him, characters like Helga or other difficult characters were the ones sort of like adding chaos to his life, and he was trying to find ways to work around that effectively. The fact that he was in a house where a lot of people were boarding opened up a lot of opportunities to bring in kind of creative angles for storytelling and different narratives, depending on like what side character was going through what at any given time. It's a very, dynamic and versatile show. I just thought there were points where it was a little boring and underwhelming, for a kid's cartoon. And on top of that, to this day, as much as the series was very self-aware about this, especially, with like, writing referencing Arnold's football head, I still to this day find the characters of the show to just be like visually unappealing. Like I don't think it's the most appealing show to look at. I much more enjoy the voice acting, the writing, the performances, and the storylines than I do enjoy how the cartoon hits aesthetically. But I don't think that's so much of an issue that I think the show is trash or anything like that. I think it's a very good and a very solid show, and a must watch, even if it's not, your favorite. For anybody who's into American kids animation, I would put it pretty solidly in the B section. Okay, next show that I want to put on the chopping block is the Angry Beavers. Angry Beavers is a show that honestly, when I was a kid, I still think it's a pretty fun show today. And, I think it's a fairly underrated Nickelodeon show. I mean, I get it. It was a little grating for its time, and there are some jokes and recurring themes, as well as just kind of the energy of Daggett, for example, that was just annoying, just obnoxious. But I like how so many episodes, much in the same way that we see with like a regular show today, begins with a problem or maybe a scenario that's a little bit relatable, but then it snowballs into something absolutely insane and crazy. And again, like there's a lot of stupid humor, a lot of slapstick, a lot of craziness, a lot of zaniness. Of course, between the two brothers, with there being this huge IQ differential, there's a classic sort of Pinky on the Brain kind of a dynamic. One of the things that I think Angry Beavers doesn't really get appreciated for is like the speed and pacing of the show, like the things that occur and the jokes, the explosions, just the craziness that happens usually plays out so quickly. It's almost hilariously overwhelming. I get that it's not a show for everybody, and it didn't get like the best or the longest run of any Nickelodeon show for obvious reasons. It is definitely like an obnoxious show. But one that I think is definitely underappreciated a little bit. I would put it in the B column as well. Coming up next, we have Cat Dog. This show was so popular at the time that it came out, and I never really liked it that much as a kid. I still don't like it today. I'm going to get canceled for my Cat Dog opinion, probably. I think Cat Dog is crap. I think Cat Dog is awful. I think the concept is annoying. I think the constant jokes and references to the absurdity that they're half cat and half of a dog is annoying. I think the side characters are annoying. That goddamn mouse that I don't even want to remember right now is annoying. I just think their whole situation is annoying. I mean, there's definitely like aspects to the show that when I think back on it, like seem like precursors to other series that I do enjoy, like SpongeBob, for example, or something. But I just never really liked Cat Dog. I never thought the humor on the show really landed, the storylines and scenarios. I can't even recall them to this day, even though I could probably like rattle off numerous storylines to any number of like Rugrats episodes from back in the day. The episode where Tommy is, doing a duel at the freaking playground. The episode where the Halloween episode where the kids, are freaked out by the parents' costumes. The episode where Phil and Lil are kind of changing genders and, like switching the bow and everything. The episode where I can go on and on and on. I can't tell you a single fucking Cat Dog episode, even though I've watched like hours and hours of Cat Dog. I cannot tell you a single one, but like the Rugrats, I can remember those episodes. I can remember those scenarios because they were sharp and they were funny, and they added cool dynamics and lore to the series. Whereas like with Cat Dog, it was just like shit from front to back. Like I will give the show the fact that it's a weird setting, it's a weird character concept, given that it's a cat and a dog and they're attached. There is something to be said for just how absurd, like it seems as a blueprint, but in practice, it's just forgettable, weak, annoying, and painfully unfunny. Next, we have Doug. We got Doug. As I was kind of saying earlier, like Doug was a show that when it was on, did I watch it? Yeah. Was it one of my favorites? No. And there were some episodes that I just found downright boring. But, again, in retrospect, I do have to give it to the show for having a smart, simple, and recognizable animation style, a really compelling cast of characters. I like how, conceptually they approach the comedy drama, teen or young adolescent comedy drama concept as well. Doug himself was infinitely relatable, but honestly, it's a show where there's such good character balance, even though the show is not necessarily about everybody else who's on the show. A lot of the other characters are just as, if not more, intriguing than Doug actually is. And that's not a knock against the show. I think it's just a comment on how rich and interesting sort of, the universe of Doug is, whether you're talking about his, pretentious art house sister, his crush, Patty Mayonnaise, Roger Klotz, the bully, his best friend, Skeeter. I also loved his next door neighbors, the Dinks, which it was pretty funny at the time. I didn't even know Dinks or, to be a dink was a term or a word, until later when I was an adult. So no, was it the most gut-bustingly hilarious show or absurd show that Nickelodeon's ever done? Of course not, but certainly one that deserves a lot of respect in terms of what it pulled off and the cultural impact it had, because for a show for kids, it was really great in terms of illustrating, I guess, everyday struggles and tribulations of kids that might be in a high school or junior high, thinking social and friend group problems through, but bringing funny and absurd little twists into the whole thing, where Doug deals with problems by turning into Quail Man, or I love, sort of the concept of the nematode is kind of the urban legend of the show. How many, things turn up all the time in terms of the culture that is in the Doug universe, like Beats, or the freaking the band the Beats. I-you, Killer Tofu. I can't believe that I can still remember that to this day, but yeah, I can. But yeah, overall, I see as Doug as a really great animated twist on that teen dramedy kind of form. And, while, again, it's not my favorite cartoon from Nickelodeon of all time, I can't think of another cartoon that was working with a similar array, a similar emotional and conceptual formula that did it better, and did it bigger than Doug. In fact, I would say Nickelodeon went down the road to almost try to repeat this success a little bit with series such as As Told by Ginger, but in the process of that, failed horribly with a show that looks infinitely worse and is infinitely less funny, and has characters that are infinitely more annoying, like Ginger's best friend, whose very nasally voice I cannot stand to listen to. But yeah, as far as classic Nicktoons go, Doug is great. I have to put it in the F-cot. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so given that I just mentioned it, I guess I have to bring in As Told by Ginger. Yeah, this is one of my least favorite Nickelodeon shows by far. Again, I think conceptually it works with a lot of those same characteristics that Doug was, but everything that Doug had going for it, Ginger attempts but does worse. And on top of it, I also see this show as an example of, Klasky Chupo, the animation studio, that worked on so many great shows for Nickelodeon. While they were certainly a workhorse for the network in general, they were also pretty hit or miss in terms of the show quality that they handed over to Nick, and also just the visual quality of the shows that they were giving to Nickelodeon as well. And I think Ginger is an example, as I think the characters on this show just look awful. They look terrible. The animation does not look flattering. I would say they all kind of are weirdly hideous and mutated in a strange way that makes a show that is a teen dramedy where you want to relate to the characters and you want to feel for them and you want to like them, but they look so horrid. I will say one thing that I think Ginger has going for it is that it's easily one of the most emotionally intelligent shows, an animated series that I think Nickelodeon has put together for kids. But outside of that, I just don't really think it has too much more. All right, next we're going to talk about Invader Zim. Big show, classic show, one that I have a lot of love for sure at this point. Zim had a cool concept, a cool aesthetic and style, awesome character design, really fun and ridiculous storylines as well. There are numerous episodes that I still have seared into the back of my brain. The Germ episode where Zim was like, sort of like a clean freak and freaking out about bacteria and stuff. There's a lot of great stuff about Invader Zim. I will say, like, the biggest issue that I had with it back in the day and still have with it to this day, I feel like there isn't a lot of versatility in terms of how the humor of the show hits, kind of like, experiencing a lot of the same jokes over and over and over and over in terms of everything that the characters are saying and are reacting to being like so grand and overstated. But, that's not something that I think ruins the show in general or makes it like unwatchable. It's still a very fun, unique show. In a lot of ways, I think like a precursor to stuff like Rick and Morty, for example, which I think also kind of manifested itself within the fan base of the the show itself too. There are few animation fan bases that I think are as obnoxious as the Invader Zim fan base. And, and look, I think that's because, the show kind of carries that energy as well. The show is also very unique, sharp, and funny, and well written much of the time. Okay, next we have Jimmy Neutron, show about a kid genius that gets into all sorts of antics. I mean, this show was far from original conceptually. Its CG animation was really at the time like, one of the most stunning and standout things that it had going for it, and just kind of the weird look of the characters generally. I think there are some decently funny Jimmy Neutron episodes, and as far as kid genius type shows go, it's not bad, but has the show aged well? No, I don't think so. I think the animation has aged pretty horribly. There's definitely something like to the show that I think is appealing, something that certainly makes it special and has given it, the relative amount of staying power that it has today. But, is it one of my favorites? Not really. Is it one of the worst? Not really. I think the show is generally kind of mid. Okay, next we have Kablam! Kablam, a show that I feel like you're probably not really aware of unless you're an old head, or you've really kind of like dug back into the Nickelodeon archives and have, really gained some familiarity with the shows that they've come out with over the years. Kablam was a really cool variety animation show that had like at least a spin-off or two, if I remember correctly, where, it would be a bunch of different series like Action League Now, Prometheus and Bob. If look up some of these shows on YouTube because they're really funny, sharp, ridiculous animated shorts. The show was hosted by two animated characters who would present the whole thing, and usually there'd be a storyline in the midst of all their bumps. It was a unique cartoon for the time. I guess it's still kind of a unique cartoon now. Was every short that they hit you with as amazing as the next? Obviously there were standouts like Action League that were, quite a bit funnier than everything else. But the show was still very entertaining to watch, even if there was like a short or a segment that was kind of mid or underwhelming. It was usually made up for by how funny and unique and, sharp everything else was. Okay, next, this is going to be, I think, the most recent series we include in this video, but I bring it on because of just how much popularity it's shown to have and how many episodes they've pumped out. But The Loud House. I think the show is decently funny. The animation style is okay. It's certainly visually above average, and I think the very chaotic cast of characters certainly make some storylines and just all the goings on in any given episode entertaining. Is it the funniest show? Is it like the most out there show or the most unique show in terms of the writing? No, not necessarily. But as far as like modern Nickelodeon series go, I think it's fine. I would put it in the the C column. It's not blown me away or anything like that, but it's certainly not as awful as some of the stuff that Nickelodeon has come out with in the past 10 years, that's for sure. Okay, next we have Real Monsters, another series that was certainly more popular than Kablam, but one that I think that you may not be as familiar with if you're not kind of like an old head and somebody who's really like watched a lot of Nickelodeon series over the years. This was another Klasky Csupo classic, and one, in my opinion, that their animation style really played to well because I think kind of the uh, hideousness and oddity of the way that they would draw characters sometimes or present characters played into the fact that the main characters of the show were freaking monsters, and you wanted them to sort of be gross and weird to look at. I think the character designs on this show are actually really cool, inventive, and refreshing. I loved back in the day how certain monsters on the show would have the ability to scare people in certain ways, and the fact that like monsters are living underground or sort of like far off from humanity in this community, and they sort of like have a school where they teach you how to scare people was certainly something that was far ahead of the curve of popular movies like Monsters Inc. Okay, next we have Ren and Stimpy. The Ren and Stimpy Show. Man, Ren and Stimpy back in the day when I was a kid was easily my favorite, if not just one of my favorite cartoon shows on Nickelodeon. I was always ready for a Ren and Stimpy episode. I was always psyched for a Ren and Stimpy episode. Like I knew so many episodes just like by heart. I loved the gross out humor. I liked the absurdity. Some of the characters on the show are some of my favorite cartoon characters in Nickelodeon history of all time, be it like Mr. Horse, be it Powdered Toast Man. But what I think the issue is with Ren and Stimpy is that it just has not aged very well, because I think the humor doesn't really land decades down the road. It's very one-dimensional. It's a very one-dimensional show, which is why I think like as they kind of went further into deeper seasons, they didn't really have much more to offer other than just like continuing to push the boundaries of grossness. It feels like every season was an experiment in terms of like what they could get away with on Nickelodeon, and eventually reaching, a brick wall where you couldn't push things much further for a kid show. I think like ended up making things sort of limited. And of course, like, today the shock value of the show is severely diminished because like it's not as out there as maybe it was, in the 90s. Like, it was a kid show. And I remember back in the day, like there were points at which my parents wouldn't want me to watch Ren and Stimpy. And believe me, my parents were not like prudes in terms of what I would see in movies or TV or like video games and stuff like that. But like Ren and Stimpy was definitely one of those like pressure points where, if I was not behaving or something or whatever, like, Ren and Stimpy could be on the chopping block. Okay, next we have Rocket Power, another Klasky Chupo steaming pile of garbage, in my opinion. Characters in this one looked awful. I think the setting and overall vibe of the show with the whole, kind of like West Coast skater thing, I don't know, maybe you really had to be like living that life and be there to, get down with it and relate to it. I just thought it was awful. On Nickelodeon at the time, there wasn't really like a skating show, and things like skating and surfing culture during the 90s were, really huge. And I guess to have a show in reference to that at that time made sense, but it wasn't a good show. Rocko's Modern Life, Rocko's Modern Life. The characters are so memorable. The jokes are so funny. The episodes are so absurd and ridiculous, as absurd, if not more absurd than like your average SpongeBob episode. And people love the shit out of SpongeBob. There's tons of adult humor in the show as well. When you're talking in terms of like the satirization of multinational corporations and, things like love and greed and a whole host of different topics. Like Rocko is an amazingly smart show for a kid's cartoon. And, I just love the look of the show. I think there are so many memorable episodes, like when his friend Heifer is coming to terms with the fact that he's not a wolf and he was raised by wolves, even though he's a freaking cow. The episode where he goes to the DMV, I think, is one of the best episodes. The grocery store episode. I love Rocko. I love his dog Spunky. I love his, triple, three-part friend dynamic. I think often on a lot of these shows, having kind of like, a three-part friend dynamic where they're not just like playing into a basic, smart guy, dumb guy dynamic is usually better and preferable and leads to more interesting storylines. Yeah, I mean, generally, I think it's a great show. I think it has a rich lore about it as well, and great, catchphrases and memes too. I'm a wild pig. Like such, a vivid array and cast of characters and side characters, as almost as rich as the Simpsons, universe in terms of you have your Ralphs and your groundskeeper Willies and your Superintendent Chalmers. Like there are tons of characters and figures in the Rocco universe that you look forward to seeing and have just as funny things to say as those side characters that, we love and have come to love over the years, just seeing them over and over and over on The Simpsons. Did Rocco have as long of a run or have the ability to play with those characters with the depth that The Simpsons did? No, not necessarily. But I think if they had that kind of support and budget and cultural, demand, that certainly would have been the case. It's just kind of not a show that, got all of the opportunities and the love that maybe like a Rugrats did, Still though, I think Rocco, for what it was doing at the time and for what it had the ability to do was way, way, way punching over its weight. Okay, we're kind of getting to some heavy hitters toward the end here. We have Rugrats. Rugrats, great show, stellar show, fantastic show, one of the best shows that Nickelodeon has ever put out, hands down. No question. I mean, I'm just going to put it in the S column now. I mean, no teasing about that. Rugrats was a really smart and dynamic show. And in a lot of ways was like a critique on parenting and parenthood during the period of time that it was airing, because so many episodes revolved around just things the babies were doing and were going through, and so much of the tension from the show. And it's sort of funny that it remained so fresh despite this, but so much of the tension from the show came from the babies going through, their own issues, their own problems, their own storylines, or maybe even something that might be really obvious or on the surface. But then of course, the parents are not understanding and they're not getting it. And they're coming up with their own highfalutin, ridiculous, reasonings behind why X, Y, or Z is happening. And sometimes the vehicle for that was, this Lipschitz, writer character that was, incorporated into an episode at one time and was also displayed to be clueless in terms of how to deal with the babies. Because, during that point in time, there was a lot of self-help kind of parenting, book culture and recommendations as to how to deal with your kids, because you have to take into account that the 90s were sort of a new era in terms of parenting, because there was ideologically and philosophically kind of a shift going on. And it's funny to be talking about this in, respects to a cartoon, but at this time, we're very much moving past a point culturally where everybody's starting to get on the same page in terms of you don't beat your kids, you don't hit your kids. The old operating system of parenting is, sort of falling into obscurity, and it's moving into the past. And here you have newer parents that are now navigating this world with a different set of ideals, and are also trying to kind of make things up on their own as well on the fly. Now, of course, this is not the linchpin of every single episode of Rugrats. Of course, there are tons of episodes that are really just housed within the world of the babies and Angelica and Susie and whatever is kind of happening between them in terms of dynamics. But man, what an amazing cast of characters that all have their own, personalities, desires, character archetypes. Tommy, Chucky, the twins, again, Angelica, and the way that the parents and, grandpa sort of interacts with that and sort of plays into that at any given moment was just really smart. And there's just so many plates being spun at any given time in a Rugrats episode. And any time that they would sort of take the setting out of the house, hilarity and chaos would ensue. They would get into all sorts of antics. Also, props to the soundtrack from freaking Mark Mothersbaugh on the show too. Can't say enough nice stuff about the show. It's a great show. It's a killer show. All right, next, a couple more. We have Wild Thornberrys. Wild Thornberrys, to kind of cut to the chase, I would probably put in the The C Column, another Klasky Chupo animation that I'm not super crazy about visually. I think it wasn't really the best, but I did like the concept of the show quite a bit. But, I think a lot of the humor on the show ran thin, and I think Donnie is certainly like in the top 3 for one of the worst and most obnoxious Nickelodeon characters of all time. Point blank, period. Okay, and finally, we have SpongeBob here. SpongeBob is in the S. Is S. SpongeBob is S. SpongeBob is like God tier. If there was a tier above this show, above S, SpongeBob would probably go over there. But like this and Rugrats are really like the GOAT shows of the Nickelodeon franchise. And God, every new season of SpongeBob is a goddamn banger. It's always so funny. It's always so absurd. It's always so refreshing. Great and huge cast of characters, amazing memes and running gags. I really cannot say a bad thing about SpongeBob. Like, are some episodes kind of mid or maybe not as replayable as others? Like, yes, for sure. And are there like some very tried and true, maybe stale, kind of overused tropes? In terms of like some of the character dynamics, like maybe SpongeBob himself is one of the most dynamic and likable characters, I think, in Nickelodeon animation history, because he can do and be just about anything on a given episode with incredible believability, whether he is the straight man or he's the agent of chaos. Plus, over the years, SpongeBob has been able to build like such a rich, dense lore that just seems to get, better and more interesting with every season, every new movie. There's even like a new show that's just oriented around Patrick that, may pan out into something great, may not. But the fact that SpongeBob is able to, shoot off into something like that certainly says something about kind of the quality and staying power of the show. And just to look online and see how much like internet meme culture generally owes to this one fucking kid show. Honestly, like there are elements of the show that are highly inspired by older shows like Ren and Stimpy, for example, like some of those, really close, gross out stills that they do. But the thing is, like, SpongeBob does that and then adds so many other characteristics that are like, far superior. Just can't say enough good stuff about SpongeBob. SpongeBob's incredible. SpongeBob is great. And it's easily one of my favorite animated shows of all time, period, sort of transcending even just the Nickelodeon list here. Read it and weep. I will also give a quick shout out over here to Avatar: The Last Airbender. I know I'm popping this in quick toward the end. This is one of the series they dropped in the 2000s that I'm not super familiar with, but there's still a lot of respect for this show for being as popular and as groundbreaking as it is in terms of like fantasy adventure and action, and bringing together like American animation with anime style animation. Obviously, like a lot of lore and depth to the storylines and characters on this show as well. I would rank it very high generally, but it's not one that I'm familiar with personally in terms of like watching all the episodes, but it is a franchise, conceptually I'm familiar with and have a lot of respect for, even if it's not something I found the time to become a big fan of, myself recently. So I think that's it. I think that's where I would place all that stuff. You guys are the best. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Nicktoons, forever.